Awesome, 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 possum, gossum, blossom. Awesome. Hello, I am back again with a 10,000 hour video, 1 year after I made my last one. Yeah. So, last summer I started this little series called 10,000 Hours. It was based on a book that I read that was all about, if you put 10,000 hours into something, you will succeed for the most part. So I was like, okay, yeah, let me do this for videos. And then what did I do? I didn't do that. I spent maybe like 40, 50 hours that summer making videos, and I spent the rest of the time just completely messing around. Now, what I'm trying to get at here is that I'm very, very bad at sticking to commitments. And that's something I'm okay with because you have to love your own flaws. But this weekend, I was in San Francisco hanging out with some friends, and one of my friends kind of brought up my YouTube channel. He asked me kind of what I was doing, and I kind of rehashed everything I'd been doing this school year, which was not that much, thanks to... And I brought up this idea of this 10,000 videos, and he was actually pretty interested by it. He thought, wow, that's a really cool idea. Did you stick with it? And of course the answer is no. I have no commitment. I have commitment issues with my video camera. I'm like a shitty boyfriend to it. But he asked me kind of what I was doing with that. And I told him how I kept track of all my hours, like literally checklist out 1 hour out of the 10,000 until I literally added up 10,000 hours. He told me, that's a little bit tedious. Why would you do that? And in that moment, I realized maybe the reason why I didn't finish the 10,000 hour series was literally because it was tedious and boring to do. If I'm gonna try doing this 10,000 hour thing again, I think I should cut the crap, stop trying to count like the number of hours I'm doing, because although that is like kind of like a novelty thing, like, oh, I'm literally counting all the way up to 10,000, it totally detracts from the point of making all these videos, which is like building your craft. So I think the plan is for this summer, my 10,000 hour videos will just be more like me talking in front of a camera, talking about things that I've done in the last X amount of time between the last video and the current video, and just, I don't know, like somehow just putting my like thoughts about life, video, work onto screen. And yeah, so hopefully that'll be fun. And we will get started with that as soon as I just got a hat on. Yeah. This year, I feel like there are a couple things that I've really taken the time to learn. Halfway through the school year, around Christmas time, I transitioned from Final Cut Pro, which is like Apple software, to Adobe Premiere Pro. And this was largely in part because the company that I work with at school that makes videos uses Premiere Pro. And to that point, I'd been more of like a creative kind of individual in the group. I was doing a lot of like the ideation, storyboarding, but I wasn't actually making any of the videos. And I told my boss, I'm interested in starting to do some more editing because I like to like be part of that process that I'm brainstorming. It's really important to get the full sense of like the creative process. I've realized that the Premiere tool is, although a little bit more difficult to use just because it's a little bit less intuitive, it's more of like industrial tool. It has a lot of power to it. There's a lot of things that are a little bit more tedious, such as like working with speed, like making shots faster, slower, but that also lends to more capabilities that you can use with it. I feel like this year has been a lot of me like learning how to use my camera in relative to Premiere or my editing software. In the past, it's always been like, okay, I'm gonna shoot something and then I'm gonna like patch it together, right? Like there wasn't that much editing within each clip itself. It was more like, okay, I'm gonna stitch this clip onto this clip with like some transition or with some creative like camera work. But this year was really like realizing, wow, like these softwares have so much capability that like I'm like totally not realizing. Like this takes like effect in so many different things that I'm doing. Like just recently, I learned this like new feature where you can turn like a daylight scene into a nighttime scene. And of course, like this requires like camera work still because you have to find an angle where you don't catch shadows, so everything kind of has like a uniform lighting to it. But it was really cool seeing how these two pieces of like video making come together. It's not really like one or the other, but it's kind of a combination of both. And this kind of brings me to like what I'm working on right now. I'm currently working in product marketing for a little startup that was started by a Duke alum called Sentry. They do like software security, artificial intelligence for like security cameras and stuff, whatnot. I just said a bunch of jargon. What the fuck? Anyways, the point is we're making a video that's basically called The Boy Who Cries Wolf, and the premise of this video is that, you know, your security camera often detects a lot of motion, so it'll notify you. But after like so many notifications, people tend to turn deaf to those notifications, kind of the way that like the villagers in the story of The Boy Who Cries Wolf become deaf to, like, you know, the cries of the boy as he continues to play tricks on them. And I felt like that analogy tied together really well, and so did the rest of the team. So we're taking that and turning it into a video concept. And so this is actually like the first time I've ever had to storyboard, like actually put together something with that much detail, like managing the props, the costumes, building those costumes, shooting, storyboarding, like the whole 9 yards and then some more, right? Like that whole process was really tedious. It took us 2 weeks to even get started shooting. And now that we're actually on this shooting, I'm realizing how limited my skill set is. I'm hoping that this kind of becomes a catalyst for me to continue to advance my skill shooting. There's always things in my head that I can see because I've like drawn inspiration from like advertisements and commercials, but the actual act of executing it is so much more difficult than I ever imagined. And so that kind of like summarizes it. This school year was a lot of just kind of messing around and transitioning from this style of just vlogging, which is just like taking different shots and stitching them together, and then learning to actually create narratives that use camera angles, editing, and different aspects to make it actually like an engaging story. But yeah, part 2 has been like what I want to do with YouTube. If you look at my recent uploads, a lot of it has actually been like visual poetry, and that's kind of something I've been really into right now. I'm not sure how long that lasts. I have phases. I tend to like look back on every phase and cringe over the last one, but yeah, that's kind of like what I've been into. I love just recording stuff around myself, and so taking that along with my like kind of like interest in poetry, I'm able to like stitch together something that I can kind of put out there and feel happy with. It kind of makes me feel emotions. It allows me to reflect about a certain time period that I'm writing about. But ultimately, I think that like taking the time to like add an artistic twist to like vlogging or like just recording of cameras, Coca-Cola, instead of just it kind of being like just a jumble of things that are like constantly happening, a flailing of arms, if you will, you start seeing themes in life that kind of stick with you. And this is another part of the 10,000 hours that I think I'm going to add. Like, it's kind of like my ramblings of thought. So I'm sorry about this. But I think it's really interesting because if you don't take the time to really think about your life, a lot of times, like, things will just happen. Like, months will pass and, like, things will happen and you'll have stories to tell. But there isn't really much, like, internal reflection on it. And I feel like these visual poems like are kind of checkpoints for me to be like, okay, like let's take a breath and like look at like what's been happening and like see if we can find a theme in this and like help create the narrative that shapes our reflection on this time period. Because I think that like the way that you frame the past kind of affects the way that you approach the future. It sounds a little bit vague, but like think about it. Like let's say like you got a bad grade in like 9th grade. Like the way that you frame that like after the fact, like you tell yourself, oh, this was a growing experience, or like, oh, that was a point of failure, kind of educates you or like helps you determine how you react to a situation similar to that in the future. So like let's say you're in sophomore year of college and you get a similarly bad grade, like do you take this as a point of like, you know, like motivation like you did in 9th grade as you chose to, or do you use that point of failure as a reference point and then call this a failure as well and take down on yourself even more? And so like a lot of times that happens subconsciously, but I found that like because I'm doing these visual poems, I'm able to take the time to like manually put down a checkpoint and be like, this is what this part of my life has felt like and what I define it as, and this is why it shapes like my life now. So the last poem I made was called 205 Oregon, and it was all about living in this apartment that I kind of lived in all of my sophomore year. And what was really interesting about this apartment was that it was really dinky and just really bad overall. At least for like a spoiled middle class kid like me, it was horrible. And I spent a lot of alone time there, which meant that, you know, when you're alone a lot, you tend to kind of get sad, or you tend to like think too much and you get a little bit like kind of wonky in the head. But this time also meant a lot of time that I could invite people over to my own private space that was like completely mine. And so as I was packing up my bags for the end of the school year, I manually put down my checkpoint here in the form of a visual poem, and I kind of composed this piece that I think really shapes the way that I'm approaching my life right now, which is that you know, like things might suck, but like oftentimes it's when things are the worst or when you're suffering that you notice the best things in life the most as well. And I don't think that I would have reached that type of succinctness in my approach to life, or like conclusiveness in my approach to life, if I hadn't given myself the chance to write this visual poem. So that's kind of like my rant for this 10,000 hour video. I hope you guys don't mind that. I mean, I don't even think anybody watches these, so it doesn't matter. I guess I just watch myself. It's so stupid. What am I even doing this for? But anyways, that's it. I've just been writing visual poems and producing these visual poems, and I've been making commercials and learning how to storyboard and learning how to do all the collaboration between camera work and editing. The end. Goodbye. Yes.